Let's get going. So, hey everybody, my name is Nick Rago. I am VP Product Strategy here at Salt Security. For those that are unfamiliar with Salt Security, I liken us to it's always joke around and say we're the godfather of the API security space. At the end of the day, we really are here to help organizations embark on a risk-free and safe API first journey. At the end of the day, we want all of our customers to be able to embrace our new API first digital economy and reap all the benefits of it. And we do it with a platform that helps organizations through that journey, from identifying API assets, providing panoramic discovery, creating a posture governance framework for organizations, as well as setting up behavioral threat protection for a lot of the sophisticated API attacks that are typically undetected today with traditional web defenses that most organizations use. Psyched to be here today. I am joined with actually an old good friend of mine who we worked together in a previous life. Collectively, between him and I, we have had our hands in some of the largest, most sophisticated API management programs, digital transformation programs, all over, for me, North America. Claudio, I know you've been everywhere with stuff that you've done. Claudio Acquaviva, I will let you introduce yourself,
Sure.
and I'm really psyched that we're able to do this together today.
Sure. Thanks so very much, Nick. Yes, very, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Claudio Acquaviva, speaking from São Paulo City, Brazil. I am software architect here at Kong. As a matter of fact, I've been working for Kong for the last almost 6 years now. I'm a member of the engineering team, and as such, I'm responsible for um, running benchmarks and technical processes, among them to get Kong technologies playing together with our partners' technology, including, of course, Salt Security. Salt Security, as a matter of fact, is one of the main technology partners we have right now, especially for the security arena where we are right now. So, yeah, again, it's a pleasure talking to you all. Thanks so much, Nick.
No problem. And so why we're here today is really wanted to set up a webinar and a discussion around becoming a secure API first company. There's a lot of buzz. We've been hearing API first, well, Claudia and I, for a long time. We're actually seeing it happen in the enterprise world, where a lot of organizations are really moving, not just beyond their mobile applications and their their web front ends, but really moving everything enterprise wide and becoming API driven and an API first organization. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what that journey looks like for organizations, and kind of define what that actually is when people are saying API first. Talk about some of the security risks involved with it, and the better together piece here is that at the end of the day, API security, I always tell everybody, is a team sport, Claudio. Is that there's not one particular technology or vendor that that can do everything and reduce your risk. It is it's kind of a cohesion of a lot of the different technologies that are leveraged across a life cycle. And APIs, I don't know your perspective on it, but there's a lot of different technologies that become into the
Oh,
fray
yeah.
for any application that's API driven.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So what I think we wanted to do first is just talk a little bit about what is an API first company. So you hear this a lot, you see it in the press a lot. We have companies, organizations talking about it a lot. API security vendors, application or API governance and API management vendors as well. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about becoming API first, really we're talking about organizations that are prioritizing APIs at the beginning of the software development process all the way through deployment. And for those organizations, it's culturally, and it's one of the barriers to this, it really is a changing culture, in that APIs have to become first-class citizens in the software development process. And a lot of emphasis needs to be put on them, because they've become the building blocks to everything that you're building, and the building blocks to everything that your business is doing in every service that it is supplying. So from a decision-making standpoint and product standpoint, everything is built on top of APIs. And there is a long list of benefits associated with becoming an API first organization. I'm not going to go through this big laundry list of it here, but I don't know what your take on it, Claudio, is, but from my perspective, our whole digital economy right now, everywhere we look, is API driven.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we see new mobile applications every week. And then behind the scenes, of course, all these applications they're calling APIs. Therefore, you have to have a very powerful platform to support them, to secure them, to expose the application sitting behind it, and so on and so on. Absolutely.
And we'll talk about some of the complexity going through this of becoming API first, but some of the greatness involved, the great benefits of API first are also some of the detractors of being API first, or the concerns. And that's this whole notion of scalability and moving fast. And I have 5 different development teams in 5 locations using 5 different technologies. And we're gluing everything together with sort of restful endpoints to make these applications. So from a security standpoint, from an engineering standpoint and velocity standpoint, amazing. From a security standpoint, on the onset looks and sounds like a nightmare. And so a lot of organizations are really having trouble getting their arms around it. One of the terms that gets used interchangeably when organizations talk about being API first is this notion of spec first or design first development. And I think one of the interesting things that I've seen is that some folks I talk to will use the 2 terms API first and spec first, design first development interchangeably, and that is not really the case. So I think what spec first and design first is, it's a strategy, and it's part of an API first strategy. And what this basically means is that while APIs are kind of the first class citizen in the development process, and everything is everything is based off of APIs in terms of what we're doing, what we're seeing in the wild, and we're seeing with most organizations, is this rush to transform and modernize and use microservices and become API first. One of the things that often gets forgotten is documentation and design, and that's usually, unfortunately for a lot of organizations, something that's done after the fact. The whole notion of spec first development is where an organization will blueprint an API before they actually start developing and test and deploying an API. It seems like common sense. It's actually very, very difficult to implement and enforce in the enterprise world, especially when we have a lot of pressure on us to develop quickly. I know, Claudio, from your perspective and a lot of the projects that you're working in, that you've worked in, and architectures that you've actually built out for really, really large organizations, how is this getting better? Do you see more organizations moving this way? I know the North Star is to be there, but what is that looking like?
Yeah, it's getting more attraction and traction. Like, again, to become API first slash spec first. So very, very important. The comment I'd like to make is that, very, very important, the last point you are highlighting, the mocking testing. As a matter of fact, when you're designing and modeling your APIs, you're not really concerned about the application. Of course, they will become a big concern later on, but at the design and modeling time, you're not really concerned about the application sitting behind it. In fact, you're really concerned about getting a formal contract, share this contract across the multiple, as you're saying, multiple stakeholders like developers, architects, and so on, to make sure we got the right definition for the APIs. The API should do this, should not do that, and so on and so on. So again, mocking testing plays a very, very important role in this sense, because again, we are mocking what the actual application service will be in the future. That's the main point.
And it's a huge point, because what we're seeing in a lot of organizations is they wait too long. And when they get to the point where they'd be able to uncover a bad configuration or a bad design or a bad behavior that they don't want, a lot of that can be uncovered with the ability to do that, setting this up and leveraging spec first to give you the ability to do that mocking and flush those things out. One of the, just kind of one of the tales from the road, I think we've both seen a lot, is the kitchen sink API endpoints, where you don't find out until it's too late that a developer is sending a whole bunch of information back in it from an API RESTful call that the application doesn't even need. So it's from in a spec first strategy with the mocking. These are things that get flushed out before that API, even a line of code is even written to support that API.
Yep.
So it's an important piece that Claudio just mentioned, and we're actually going to talk about it as we go through sort of the use case of Kong and Salt together throughout the whole life cycle. Interchangeably with spec first right now is when people talk about Swagger, or formerly Swagger, or OAS specifications. That is typically the vehicle of choice for documentation that the industry's really standardized on. We saw Claudio years ago, like MuleSoft's RAML was like one of the first, that caught the first wave of traction for documentation for a little bit, but that was a long time ago. But OAS has really become the standard for that, and there's a lot of great tools, and we're going to talk about Insomnia in a couple minutes, and from Kong, and how can that help you on that front. From an API management trend standpoint, when, years ago when I was, working with you at Kong, it's changed a lot. And I don't know if you remember this slide. We used to use it at Kong. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, of course. Yes. Kind of, very, very easy to get lost, in these API definition, API development, and so on and so on. Very, very easy.
Yeah, so we used to, when we talk about why, years ago, why you should consider an API management platform, we used to use Amazon as kind of the gold standard and say, this is their Death Star of API endpoints that they have out there. Can you imagine not having something sort of, governing, controlling, abstracting as much as you can to control this and have visibility into this? And the interesting thing that's occurred is that while years ago, a lot of organizations were saying, well, that's Amazon's problem, that's not ours. The truth of the matter is everybody has their own API Death Star right now, because there's so many APIs are proliferating in large enterprises, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons for that. Before, there was the wave of mobile applications that led it, right? The headless client where that's only on your mobile device, and everything is being powered by APIs. We moved into the modernization of web applications, but now we have a whole bunch of elements and drivers of why organizations are really embracing APIs, from regulatory reasons, things like open banking, development platforms, and tooling internally. APIs are everywhere inside the walls, and AI, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's been a huge accelerator to this. So I think, Claudio, the piece I'm interested to hear from you is, how's this changed the API management world?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, there are so many. First of all, my story begins with these, trying to list or to highlight some important trends we see right now. So kind of, as you said, we're right now we're seeing a explosion of APIs. And why is that? As you said, companies are starting implementing their own, for financial services, for instance, their own open banking, open insurance, open everything, and then they're all based on APIs. There are other reasons. For instance, companies, they want to expose existing applications to new consumers, maybe to create new revenue streams. And then there you go. You got to define new APIs in order to expose them. And as I said, we're seeing new mobile applications every week. And then behind these applications, you got APIs again. More than that, that's for what we call the edge computing. More than that, companies is also using or defining using APIs to get their application to application communication in place, to control a little bit more the application to communication. So again, we're talking about internal APIs. So kind of, we're seeing explosive growth for APIs. At the same time, companies are running into modern application development, platform modernization. In other words, we're seeing lots of Kubernetes and Dockers and container-based platforms, DevOps, so important. like, to automate all these moving parts and so on and so on, to get a much more more control over the process, driving the development process and so on and so on. So all these, at the end of the day, it's we're seeing, like, new teams, API specific teams rising. So kind of, that's the big picture we're seeing right now. In summary, APIs are great. However, if you jump to the next slide, APIs are solving a lot of problems for us. They are great, but at the same time, you start seeing some side effects, some new issues, let's say. So, for instance, developers are start creating new APIs with no control, very little control. So, kind of, something like, again, as I said, very easy to get lost across these multiple APIs getting created and developed and so on and so on. So more than that, each API is potentially a point of attack. So again, we're seeing, like, for instance, just like it's saying, 50% organization experiencing some incidents, security incidents, related to their APIs. So another thing, please go ahead.
I was going to say, we're putting out a new, one of the things here we do at SALT is a lot of the research that we have and the reports that we do. We have a state of API security report. Those metrics have become like the hallmark in the cybersecurity industry related to API security. And some pretty, the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of the acknowledged API attacks, and not just attacks, but actual incidents and breaches associated with APIs in the last year. So that report's going to be coming out soon, and it actually, the numbers are actually, we saw, were worse.
Oh yeah. So again, like, as I said, APIs are great, but then again, you have to deal with, let's say, new issues, the side effects when adopting them. So again, multiple APIs getting created every time, every day, and so on and so on. So new attacks, multiple protocols, downtimes, and so on and so on. So the point is, we have to have something new driving the APIs for us.
Yeah,
that's where the API management tools or platforms, they come in. So as a matter of fact, the API management, they're responsible for, first of all, to provide a single point of contact. So no more APIs getting created, but the API manager should be responsible for compiling or to providing a single point of contact to the consumers. So if you want, in other words, if you want to consume API, go to the API management, and then the API manager is exposing the APIs for you, and to consolidate. Therefore, you're going to have a much more secure and much more controlled process driving the API lifecycle and so on and so on. At the same time, yeah, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I was saying that usually the API management, they have or should have capabilities to provide you a cost-effective scenario. What does that mean? It means that the API management platform should be able to go elastic, meaning that if you have more consumers, the API management should allocate more resources. If you have less consumption, you should be able to release these resources and so on and so on. In other words, the infrastructure should go elastic in order to handle, to process these a given throughput. The API management is handled at a given moment. So the other thing, very important, once you got the API management in place, they're not just to protect or to expose to protect the APIs, but actually the API management is responsible for other very complex and important processes. For instance, throttling or rate limiting, if you will. Security in terms of user authentication, application authentication, this kind of thing. In other words, the API manager is going to remove, as a side effect, is going to remove all these processes you typically have in your applications. They're going to remove that because the API gateway will be responsible for all this. leading
Yeah.
to a much lighter development process, therefore a faster time to market in terms of launching new versions for applications or new applications and so on and so on.
And then inherently, I think the last piece is with that as well, this, like you just said, this notion of reducing risk as well, is because
Oh,
we're
yeah.
abstracting so much away from the developers right now, and we're going to normalize rate limiting, authentication, caching, and we're not going to make the developers be responsible for that piece anymore. Um, uh, Good and bad. I think the bad part of that was that then some of the developers thought that the gateway and other things were going to do a lot more. And
Oh, yeah.
so, at the end of the day, developers do have a stake in the security as well. But the abstraction piece, I agree, is really important. I wanted to, Claudio, get your thoughts on one thing. We keep, just because even if anyone follows Kong, you'll see, I think the tagline at the company right now is more AI means more API. So,
Yeah.
talk us through sort of that notion of AI being really an accelerant in for the proliferation of APIs in organizations right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, we all know AI is a vast field. So there's so many technologies and nuances and perspectives and so on and so on. So the thing, but at the same time, we're seeing right now is lots of interest in specific, let's say, profile or AI, which is the LLM or large language model, which are models responsible for processing natural language. In other words, for instance, the Chat GPT. So, you as a user, you're going to send questions and going to get responses to your questions. So that's the what we see, like the main interest in terms of artificial intelligence. So, having said that, very very important to protect the service with the APIs. For instance, so every time you as a user, you send an API to send a question, for instance, that would be great to have something to analyze the question. Maybe you're going to enrich, maybe you're going to block the question, not routing the question to the actual server to process the question for you, and so on and so on. That's the kind of processing you're talking here. In other words, the API gateway should be sitting in front of your AI infrastructure in order to process this kind of thing. So again, to protect the AI infrastructure, another use case that will be to have APIs in order to train or to call the APIs to train the models before exposing them to the actual users and so on. The same thing for connecting. So the AI infrastructure, the LLM model, maybe they're going to connect to other applications. Therefore, again, that would be great to have APIs in order to control this communication as well. So that's the kind of thing we're seeing right now. Kong as a vendor exploring exactly these use cases right now. So, for instance, for those familiar with these things, Kong is already implementing some specific. It's not a case to reuse the capabilities we typically provide for no AP or no AI applications. But as a matter of fact, we are injecting new capabilities, specific capabilities to process AI kind of requests. So, for instance, rate limiting, you have to have a specific policies for that. So let's call the traditional rate limiting policies. Now we're talking about a specific rate limiting policies just for AI. The same thing applies for caching, for instance. AI requires specific caching technologies. Now I'm talking about vector databases. I'm talking about semantic cachings and so on and so on. So the kind of caching you're quite familiar with, they're not enough for the AI context right now. So that's the kind of thing Kong as a API vendor is doing right now. We're calling this AI gateway, meaning that we're going to enhance the existing API gateway with a specific AI technology. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and sort of the counter with us, or the complementary piece with us, is, with our customers, we're getting asked all the time because they're so reliant on AI, and basically everything that that they're doing. And again, whether it be consumption of data to make business decisions, generating code, whether it be training. One of the most important assets for organizations now are their LLMs. And I have to make sure, that I trust the data that's actually going inside of that. And how do I secure that pipe and that feed? Because to your point on the right, one bad, you're only as good as your weakest link, especially from an AI standpoint, when you're chaining multiple AI decision trees with multiple providers and LLMs. So it's important that whole process be secured. So we'll talk a little bit more of that as we go through this. What I want to do is I want to get us over to the use case between the two platforms and what this actually looks like between working and integrating Salt together with Kong throughout an API lifecycle. And I'll kind of preface it with, this is at the end of the day when I'm walking with organizations right now and they're on their API first journey, or they're modernizing, or they're building their API platform teams. This is the reality that security is really facing right now, is that when we're doing this, I have to understand that this is an inescapable production reality for us. It's an inescapable risk in production, I should say, because of three main things. One is, a lot of organizations have no posture governance program. They haven't gone through the same footsteps they've gone through with cloud security, where we've gotten the cloud governance community in a room, we've figured out what is good cloud security, and to enable you to use that. That hasn't happened in most organizations with APIs yet, where someone has said, here's the gold standard of what is good. A lot of organizations are going through that right now. I don't know what I have. I don't know what data is associated with it, who owns it, and I don't know if I trust it. The second thing is this whole notion that these attacks are evading the web defenses that most organizations are putting in front of the API gateways first. So gateways are doing a lot, but there's a lot of logic attacks that only show their face when you poke and prod the API and try to induce some type of negative behavior out of it. And there's a lot of examples of organizations that have struggled with that. We saw Sam Curry was a security researcher recently who showed how they were able to, he was able to take advantage of connected cars business logic flaws in XM connected cars, and literally could walk up to a car, put in a VIN number, and start the car and unlock it. So it pretty substantial logic flaws are very difficult to uncover with traditional pattern or signature-based security. And the last piece is this whole notion of API security. We talked about this before, Claudio, at the beginning, is that it is a team sport. So Kong, Salt, every elements of your DevOps pipeline, your SecOps tooling, all need to be enriched with API intelligence so that you have a cohesion from a risk reduction standpoint. So what I wanted to do is let's go through a couple of use case here visually and talk through, with Kong and Salt together, how that API first journey could actually, can actually be secured. And I'll start here because this is, if you talk to a lot of consultancies, transformation consultancies, and partners and analysts, one of the first things they're telling organizations is you have to understand and define what good is first. If you can do this, a lot of organizations are already far down the path, but for that next wave of API proliferation and development, take the time now, just like you did with cloud security, to define what a good API is. So here at Salt, one of the big things at the beginning of the API first journey, or greenfielding a new application and taking sort of under the strategy, is we've actually built a posture governance policy engine that allows organizations to take their written standards and incorporate them into technology, like etch in stone the 10 commandments of developers, thou shall not, architects, thou shall not, when they develop architect and deploy the APIs. So for a lot of organizations, that is an important piece. What other requirements I have from a PCI standpoint, GDPR, HIPAA, that I need to make sure, that we have the right controls in place from a posture standpoint. So that is, from a best practice standpoint, where you should be first. Now, from a spec first standpoint, the next piece is, okay, great, let's actually blueprint this API. And it's funny, internally at my company, still there's a lot of people didn't know that Insomnia is Kong, and Kong actually isn't, Insomnia is a product of Kong. So, further didn't know that it is also an OAS authoring tool. So I don't know if you can take a couple of minutes, Claudio, and talk about sort of Insomnia and what is actually done from an
Yeah,
OAS authoring standpoint.
yeah, real quick. As you said, like Insomnia is another open source project Kong manages. But what is Insomnia? First of all, Insomnia is our API spec designer. So can you, as a API designer, or you're responsible for crafting your API spec, open API specs, and so on and so on. So Insomnia is going to help you out on this, not just to create the API spec, but also to test them, to validate them, to link them, and so on and so on. The thing is, Insomnia is offered, as Nick said, is offered not just a OSS version, but again, we got other editions, enterprise editions, and so on and so on. So Insomnia is very, very good for standalone kind of API designer processes. It's great, but not good. As a matter of fact, we want Insomnia to provide or to work with a collaborative environment, meaning that all designers, all developers should be working with exactly the same API spec collection. That's the kind of thing. So when we come to this, we're talking about the other flavors of Insomnia. Ine, can you please go to the next one? Yeah, that's the kind of thing we're talking right now. So kind of the API specs, as a matter of fact, they should be stored in a central repository, a Git-based repository. So all designers, all developers should be working exactly the same collection. That's, again, one of the main capabilities Insomnia provides. But, getting a central repository is not enough. So for instance, there is, and then Nick, maybe you can describe a little bit what Salt provides us in terms of API repositories to the
Yeah,
poster governance and so on.
Yeah, so the flow here for a lot of organizations is once they build that spec, you've adopted design first, you build the specification, you're saving your specifications as the first step to API development inside your source control repository. As part of your CI pipeline, Salt can be a recipient and is a recipient of the OAS specification to provide feedback whether or not that OAS specification is complying with security best practices and data handling best practices, data validation best practices. It's 50 somewhat control checks it actually does out of the box. Also, is it adhering to our corporate standards as well? And so it is a sanity check at design time that through sort of, let's say, Git actions, for example, in GitHub here, will come back with feedback and say, yes, great, you've designed this API. It cannot go any further because it is out of compliance. And this is this is important. Aaron, I saw just asked a question earlier about this whole notion of AI-generated APIs. For a lot of organizations that are moving down that path, the source of truth to develop that API through Gen AI, is the OAS specification. But I need to put guardrails in place to make sure that that specification, the specification is architected and is compliant with our standard of what is good. And then the LLM that's generating the code behind it, it also knows that what is good when it's generating the code. So this posture governance engine plays a big role here. So that's really the first step. The next step in the CI pipeline is being able to actually, again, leverage Insomnia and Insomnia's CLI interface to provide another layer of linting, testing, and validation. So I can. So I don't know, Claudio, if you want to talk a little bit about sort of the
Sure.
CLI.
Yeah. Insomnia CLI, as a matter of fact, is part of Insomnia. Insomnia is the GUI, like it's, again, as I said, a standalone tool for you as a API designer to work with, and so on and so on. But what we really want to do is to automate the pipeline. So in this sense, we have to have something else in order to take the API spec and then again submit it to your linting processes to check the process, the API spec itself, and so on and so on. That's the role INSO CLI plays. So again, it's going to be INSO CLI is going to be injected in your existing CI/CD pipeline. Whatever it is, you're going to take a Jenkins pipeline, you're going to take a Terraform, Ansible pipelines, and so on. You're going to add INSO CLI in there in order to take care of the API lifecycle as well. So, and then INSO CLI plays a very critical role in this sense to validate, to link the API specs, and so on and so on.
And then we also see after that takes place in sort of the crossover from CI/CD, is a lot of organizations have invested in testing frameworks, whether it be a Veracode or Invicti or Stackhawk, a lot of different Contrast, a lot of different companies out there. It's usually that becomes the next step is, okay, now the specification, it looks good. We're going to actually check for vulnerabilities, and we're going to actually test and exercise the application or the API to make sure that there's not some type of vulnerability associated with it. And the business logic can be exercised now because I have a specification that says exactly how the API is supposed to be used. The next piece is, if we talk a little bit about Kong Deck, because this is the piece that will take their OAS specification and really usher it to the next phase, which is actually putting this live inside of an API management, inside of the gateway configuration.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, after submitting your spec to a long list of checks and so on and so on, you don't have anything else. Like, you need something else to translate your spec into what we call the Kong declaration. And then the Kong declaration, as a matter of fact, is going to be submitted to be applied to our Kong API management infrastructure in order to get the API finally getting materialized. So kind of, the API is going to be there, like implemented in your gateway. So who is responsible for this? Kong Deck. As a matter of fact, Deck, it stands for Declarations for Kong, is going to take the API spec created by INSO, validated by INSO CLI. I'm going to translate it, parse it, and translate it to actual Kong declaration. Therefore, you're okay. Now you're okay to submit this declaration to Kong API management infrastructure, and then getting your API, finally, your API getting materialized, deployed in your Kong API gateway. Not just the APIs in your gateway, but actually documentation as well. So Kong provides not just the gateway, again, but also another component, very, very important component, to document your APIs. Therefore, the developers, they can go to their portal to check the APIs, to read documentation, to try them out, and so on and so on. So Deck Escape is responsible for not just publishing the APIs themselves, but actually to deal with documentation in order to to expose the documentation to the actual developers, the internal developers, external developers. So yes, as you can imagine, that portal provides security mechanisms to control the developers and so on, registrations, self-services, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and at this point, again, taking this approach where we're spec first, by the time it gets to the dev portal, pretty clean documentation. It's trustworthy documentation, which is, for most organizations, this is backwards. They're doing the documentation after the fact. And there's a lot of drift between that documentation to what's running in production when doing that. So the trustworthiness of those developer portals is pretty low in a lot of the surveys that I've actually seen in a lot of these large enterprises. Do you trust your API documentation? And then obviously the meat of this here is that configuration based off the OAS specification finds its way into the Kong gateway. And the gateway itself, I don't know if you can talk about just maybe in a minute or two, Claudio, a lot of that abstracted security that we talk about, Kong plays a big role in API security because it does a lot of these things for you. So can you talk maybe just a minute about exactly what it does?
Sure. Real quick. I mean, like the gateway is responsible not just to expose the APIs. I would say, like, that's the easiest part of it. The thing is, you got to control the exposure. That's the main part. So that's the most important part, I should say. So in other words, I say what I mean is that the gateway should be responsible to apply for some specific security policies. For instance, we got a short list of the main policies related to security: authentication, access control based on OpenID Connect, and so on and so on, access control, mutual TLS, CORS, rate limiting, to to define threshold or throttling policies for your APIs, and so on and so on. So again, this is just a short list of policies the gateway provides. If you go to Kong website, you're going to see so many other ones related to transformation, related to log processing, and so on and so on and so on. Again, we are focusing on the policies related to security. Again, these are the main ones we provide this time.
And then the next piece here is that, so that's the security responsibilities of the Kong gateway. When you plug in, and Claudio mentioned the plugin library or the hub that is on the Kong website. One of those is a plugin specifically for Salt. And what this basically does is it integrates the Kong gateway into the Salt platform. And the idea here is it provides advanced security for Kong. And it does this, I'd say, in a few different dimensions. The first is around this notion of continuous panoramic discovery. This gives us the ability to inventory everything that's going through the Kong gateway. It gives us the ability to classify data in motion in and out of the Kong gateway. So now you understand what each endpoint is actually doing from a data classification standpoint. Map it to the business, maps it to the CMDB, who owns it, what's the business function associated with it, what's the IT asset in the CMDB associated with this particular API endpoint. It basically it transforms the Kong gateway assets into IT assets in like an ITSM solution. The other thing a lot of people don't know is that this also, from a discovery standpoint, will generate documentation. So if you have a lot of configurations or endpoints that are running through the gateway that you're not greenfielding it and running through this process that were already there, Salt can actually look at the Kong traffic, generate the documentation, and create a flywheel where now that documentation can go through this process and populate the Kong developer portal for you. So again, it gets you into a current state with your documentation just by plugging it into Salt. The second piece of this is around the posture assurance piece. And this is whole notion of what's running in production. Am I comfortable with that? Is it good? Is it meeting best practices and our corporate standards of what is good? Is it, from a compliance gate standpoint, is it compliant? And so that policy engine I talked about before, this is another place that we actually verify that what's running through the Kong gateway, is it compliant or not? We use a lot of AI-based insights to let you know if you are out of compliance and how to fix it. A lot of integrations with the DevOps ecosystem, as I mentioned before, whether it be OAS specifications into your source control repository that we're auto-generating. Also integration with the testing providers and testing frameworks. So again, we build inventories and specifications that you could use inside your, let's say, a DAS tool, for example. The other interesting thing this does as well is it will highlight any assets that are outside of Kong governance. Again, because this is panoramic discovery. Kong is obviously one data point. We could be plugged into a CDN. We could be plugged into, let's say, Kubernetes. And you may be shocked to find out that, there you have, let's say, 100 endpoints that are exposed to the outside world that are not going through the Kong gateway. So from a governance standpoint, you may have a policy that says everything that has to go through the Kong gateway that has sensitive data, Salt can uncover that and create that flywheel and create the posture remediation so that you can alert the architect and make sure that you re-architect to get yourself back into compliance and that data is flowing through Kong. The last thing is on the behavioral threat protection I mentioned before. This is another element of the advanced security protection because this is very, very difficult to do. A business logic flaw cannot be detected with an API gateway, can't be detected with Kong, can't be detected with a traditional CDN or a WAF. So this is when a bad actor or a malicious API user is trying to find and do some negative behaviors on your API, something the developer left behind. A lot of times it's like a testing loop or code that they might have left behind that somebody figured out how to exercise, get access to somebody else's data, exfiltrate data, get privileged access to a system, whole lot of things that you could do with these logic flaws. And the attack types are right now literally written by AI, these bots, and they're designed to stay low and slow under the radar as well. So it's a different type of attack. And so behaviorally, when plugged into Kong, we want to be able to make sure that none of your APIs that are flowing through that gateway are vulnerable to any one of these attacks. And again, a lot of AI, years of training these models to make sure that we understand what's malicious from an anomaly perspective and what is not. We want to find bad actors when they're doing reconnaissance. The one thing I want to mention here, before we kind of take just quick questions, is you mentioned earlier, Claudio, this notion of mocking. Yeah. What is really interesting about this integration to me is everything that you and I just went over, all of these checks and validations can be done without a single line of code being written. And because Kong supports a very, very important feature
Yeah.
based off of this whole workflow and the specification called mocking. So Claudio, can you talk maybe just a quick
Yeah,
minute
sure.
about mocking?
Sure, absolutely. Everything we have shown can be, as you said, like, can be implemented without the actual application sitting behind it and so on and so on. That's because Kong provides a mocking capability based on exactly the same API specs, by the way. So you're going to take these same exactly API specs using to create the APIs to create the mocks themselves. Therefore, the API is going to consume the mocks, of course, playing exactly the same role the future application is going to be playing. So again, this is a part of the gateway itself. So again, another very, very important capabilities when we come to these, the API lifecycle, CI/CD pipelines, and so on and so on.
Yeah, so and like a PCI non-compliance and GDPR non-compliance, all of like literally can be flushed out before a line of code is even being written, which is in a couple different places where these compliance gates are running, which is really, really powerful. So we have a few minutes here to take some questions. If anybody has questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Actually, the first one that came up, Claudio, and I'll read some other ones as here as well, was can you maybe in like 30 seconds, someone asked, can you show an example of a specification inside
Yeah.
Insomnia?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I
Yep.
should share my screen now.
Yes, let me go ahead
Yeah.
and stop my share.
So I hope you can see my screen now.
Yep, got it.
Okay, good. So what we're seeing right now is Insomnia. Insomnia, as I said, is a tool you install in your own laptop. Chrome provides 3 versions of this tool for the 3 main platforms: Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. And then, again, I'm inside Insomnia. As you can see, there are a lot of documents here. So for instance, I got the famous Swagger pet store. As a matter of fact, they are keeping using Swagger. As a matter of fact, that's the old name. Right now, we're talking about Open API, which is the new name for it. And then again, I just took as is. I haven't changed anything. I just took you can do yourself. You can download the Open API spec from the Swagger Hub site or something. And here's on your left, you see the actual spec. On your right, you see the visual representation. And then there is a linting process running behind the scenes. So if, for instance, if I have some, error, you're going to see a specific error, like a warning saying, hey, I don't know what it is, and so on and so on. So you're supposed to change, to correct the spec. The same thing if you, for instance, if you change anything in your spec, you see the new visual representation on your right. And then on your right, you see not just the visual representation, but as a matter of fact, you can try the APIs out. For instance, let's see this one. So here's the API, you can try them out. And then you can push it and see the results. You can execute it, you see the results, and so on and so on. The thing is, originally the server is pointing to nowhere. So there's no service handling these requests. That's why I'm getting these core zero and so on and so on. The thing is, as I said, I took as this. I haven't changed anything. You are supposed to start, changing your existing APIs, or maybe writing new APIs from scratch. That's the thing. So again, Insomnia is not just for the API designer, but as I said, you can create your test unit, your unit test units using Insomnia, validate them, and so on and so on. And then again, my Insomnia is already connected to a Git-based repository. I can use it as my repository to store all my specs and so on and so on. I think that will be it.
Yeah, and then related to that, there was a question that came up. I just saw that was how much of the logic you mentioned can be put into the IDE itself. Right now, the flow that we showed you was a CI flow, CI integrated flow. So if Claudio clicked to check into GitHub, a Git action would have fired off and allowed us to run those checks. Insomnia does support plugins though, so stay tuned. Because there's opportunity to do that as well. We had a couple questions regarding sort of Kong Connect and does this work does everything have to be in the cloud? While Salt and our cloud compute and cloud, our data lake is up in the cloud to do a lot of the, the magic that we do from an API security standpoint. This works completely with APIs that could be completely resident on premise, right? So Kong does not have to be monitoring, APIs that are either externally facing or the Kong infrastructure, the gateways do not have to be cloud-based themselves, correct?
Exactly. So yeah, we provide two main flavors of Kong, like the SaaS-based offer. Now you got everything running in the cloud, or if you will, everything running on premise. So that does not mean you're not able to run a hybrid deployment. So some instances running on premise, other instances running in the cloud. As a matter of fact, we're going to follow your technical decisions you're going to have along the way. So maybe you're going to start on premise and then you're going to move to the cloud. That's totally fine. You can do it. So kind of, with a minimum effort, a minimum change in the API gateway cluster, you can do it, to support your new decisions and so on and so on. That's the thing.
And then there's a question related to that from Mohammed, who basically asks, is Kong Connect available on a self-hosted Kubernetes cluster? And he mentioned like using KGO.
Yeah, real quick, Connect is the name we use for the SaaS version of Kong. As a matter of fact, Connect right now provides only the control plane module, which is control plane is responsible for the administration's test. So you go to the control plane to create APIs and so on and so on. The data planes, the actual guys responsible for the actual API consumption, you can have them whenever and wherever you want. So all data planes should be connected to your control plane running the cloud. But then again, you can deploy your data planes whenever and wherever you want. Very, very dynamic environment. You are supposed to destroy and create data planes along the way because you got so many other variables to deal with. And then the gateway should be moved, the data plane should be moved from this environment to the other. So Connect, every time we say Connect, we mean the control plane provided in SaaS. Again, you can have your control plane running on premise if you will. That's another option for you.
All right, that's great. And we're probably just about out of time here. We had one question from Mr. Aaron Miller that we both know, Claudio, asking me the Stormtrooper helmet behind me. When am I getting a Boba Fett helmet? So actually, I'm getting a Dead Mouse helmet first, but then I'll work Aaron on the Boba Fett helmet to be behind me. Anything to take attention away from my head, I always tell people with my backdrop here. So Claudio, let's do it again. This was awesome.
Yes.
I'd love maybe the opportunity to actually show it live. I think conceptually it's important to talk about first. But yeah, I think the opportunity to show it live and show how the technologies work together would be amazing. But thanks, man, for jumping on here.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks so much.
For those that are interested, where can they get more information about Kong?
Yeah, the main reference is, first of all, the website konghq.com. But to get all more information about everything we have described and talked about, you should go to docs. There is a link inside the landing page, docs.konghq.com. You have all documentation for all products, not just the gateway, but Insomnia as well, and so on and so on.
Okay, great.
I talked about, and so on and so on. All the components will be there.
Perfect. And for information on Salt, just go to salt.security. You can find Claudio and myself on LinkedIn. Contact us. We love talking about everything related to API. We do have some joint data sheets as well. So, excuse me, reach out to us. We're happy to share that and that information. This webinar is going to be recorded, so it's going to be available on demand and can be distributed amongst your teams or inside your organization if you're interested in sharing information. Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it and look forward to helping both of our customers reduce risk on their journeys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, my pleasure, Nick. Let's do it again.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
All right, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.